brandishing the Constitution like a sword.
My. That is your position. Okay, and you're...
Excuse me, Congressman.
One lost a finger, one lost an eye.
My God. Fentanyl is now the drug of choice.
His results have been quite effective.
Will the gentleman yield to answer the question?
No.
Thank you for your very politically correct answer.
Which do you want?
Send children to detention camps?
I'm unaware that the Secretary has sold any fentanyl.
No.
Is there any evidence that Secretary Mayorkas has enslaved anyone?
I pitched that one up as a softball, buddy, and you failed miserably.
Good morning. Today is a solemn occasion as this committee begins official impeachment proceedings in the matter of Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas and his handling of America's borders since taking office in February 2021. I wish we weren't sitting here today. I wish these proceedings were not necessary. I wish our southwest border was secure. I wish that our government was enforcing the laws passed by the Congress and doing its job to keep the American people safe. Unfortunately, Secretary Mayorkas has done none of these things. For almost a year, the House Committee on Homeland Security has conducted a comprehensive investigation into the causes, costs, and consequences of the unprecedented crisis at our southwest border. Our evidence makes it clear. Secretary Mayorkas is the architect of the devastation that we have witnessed for nearly 3 years. The findings of our investigation, available to the public at homeland.house.gov, coupled with the Secretary's refusal to change course on the reckless decisions facilitating this crisis, have left us with no reasonable alternative than to pursue the possibility of impeachment.
In his life, extreme MAGA Republicans have created this impeachment circus sideshow, in part to try to distract from their own failures. They took their sideshow on the road recently, traveling to the border to stand behind a podium, making canned speeches and posing for photo ops. But for all their border security bluster, Republicans oppose funding necessary to secure the border. They're angry that this administration won't take babies from their moms or put kids in cages like the last administration. The facts show Secretary Mayorkas is doing his job across the department's many critical Homeland Security missions, including border security and immigration enforcement. Despite what Republicans would have Americans believe, Secretary Mayorkas is enforcing immigration law. Democrats are doing everything they can to hold the line against Republican chaos. Democrats want to strengthen border security. We want to keep fentanyl off the streets. We want to keep communities safe. This circus sideshow impeachment does none of that. Mr. Chairman, let's drop this baseless impeachment and start doing the real work of securing the homeland for the American people.
And let's look at the numbers. They speak for themselves. 8 million encounters under this administration, 2.3 aliens in the interior of the United States with no legal status, enough to fill up 13 states. Just last month, we had over 300,000 trying to get into the United States. Over 300 on the terror watch list have gotten into the United States. When I chaired this committee, that was a big red flag, and the FBI director said so when he testified as well. Over 200,000 Americans have died from fentanyl. I personally went to a funeral last Saturday. One of my children's friends died from Xanax laced with fentanyl. 200,000 Americans, that's more than triple the number of Americans who died in the Vietnam War, to put that into perspective. The Secretary has emboldened a criminal enterprise and the biggest human trafficking scheme in my lifetime. He terminated MPP. Chief Ortiz noted that had a direct cause and effect. And when Mayorkas went down to the border, they turned their backs on him because, quote, "Sir, you have turned your back on us."
On January 6th, he incited and aimed a violent mob at the Capitol. 6 police officers would later lose their lives. One lost a finger, one lost an eye. The president was impeached. 10 Republicans voted for that impeachment. Mr. Knudsen, should he have been impeached for that? Yes or no?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, he was.
Okay. Mr. Drummond?
He was impeached for that.
And should he have been?
I don't have an opinion on that issue.
Okay. Mr. Bailey, what do you think about that?
He was acquitted of those charges.
According to the Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics, Oklahoma has a unique status sitting just north of the Texas and right along major routes away from the southwest border for both drug and human smuggling. Can you talk about how the fentanyl crisis over the past few years has impacted your state?
So we, with the legalization of marijuana in Oklahoma, it's not become the drug of choice to cross the border. Fentanyl is now the drug of choice. And I take exception with the representative who said it is just to say no. It is a crisis in which we find fentanyl laced in many drugs, such that we instruct our young children to test every pill. If you think you're taking a pain pill, it's probably laced with fentanyl. And we can trace those back to the porous border through which the fentanyl product comes in concert with the Mexican cartels and the Chinese syndicated organizations.
You know, often I see my colleagues across the aisle brandishing the Constitution like a sword. You love to quote it, you love to cite it, you love to talk about what the Founding Fathers intended, that original intent, but it's kind of like Shakespeare and the Bible. Those who talk about it the most have seldom read it and really may not understand what's in there. You know, if you talk about original intent, you're saying what the Founding Fathers intended. Now, that's a smaller country, smaller population, smaller budget. We had no AI, we had no drones. How do we know what they intended? Well, often we don't, but in this case, we know exactly what they intended. All you have to do is look at some of the notes from the Convention of the Constitution by Madison, who did not want to include the maladministration because it was too broad and policy-oriented. Look at Federalist Papers 65 by Hamilton, a conservative at the time, who did not want to include this broader interpretation of impeachment. Now, you've also heard Mr. Bowman's arguments, a respected scholar who you have demeaned his expertise by insinuating, oh, he's just a Democratic witness. But he is not alone in this position. Mr. Turley's letter was mentioned. There is an article in The Hill about another letter from legal scholars. This is a group of legal scholars who wrote a letter to our chairman and the leadership of the House, Speaker Johnson, that says their proposed grounds for impeaching Mayorkas are the stuff of ordinary policy disagreement in the field of immigration enforcement.
When he was asked by Congressman Guest, do you maintain today, in light of the statements made by Chief Ortiz, that the border is secure, Secretary Mayorkas replied, Congressman, I stand by my prior assessment because indeed I define it as maximizing the resources we have to deliver the most effective results. His results have been quite effective. Here are some of Secretary Mayorkas's effective results. Approximately 10 million illegal border crossers from over 160 countries have invaded the United States since President Biden took office and Secretary Mayorkas started his job. This is a number combined with over 8 million encounters and over 1.8 million gotaways. In September 2023, over 341,000 illegal border crossers invaded our country, surpassing all national records. Secretary Mayorkas is bringing the results. In fiscal year 2023, there were over 3 million illegals who invaded the border, the highest number of yearly illegal alien encounters in U.S. history. That far surpasses those that were supposedly deported. There have been approximately 73,000 special interest aliens arrested at our border. Those are the ones that we know of, ladies and gentlemen. There's over 1.8 million gotaways, and we have no idea how many in that 1.8 million or more are terrorists, are from terrorist nations. We don't know where they are, what they're doing, and what their plans are for the United States of America, including the states that you're working very hard to protect. These are some impressive results.
One rule that the department has implemented was the asylum processing rule, which would allow asylum officers rather than immigration courts to decide asylum applications for those placed in expedited removal to significantly expedite the process. That might reduce the backlog. That might create a disincentive to come. That's something that Secretary Mayorkas did to address the border. No, you sued him to stop him from doing that. How about the circumvention rule? Or that is the circumvention, excuse me. How about the asylum circumvention rule, which says that you have to either appear at a port of entry or have first sought asylum from a neighboring country? That would reduce the people who could apply for asylum. No, you sued them. You sued them to stop them from doing that. And how about trying to address the parole decisions to allow some people to come in and be able to actually have work authorizations so that they are not just sitting on the dole? No, you sued them. So this is what we have. We have Republicans suing Secretary Mayorkas to stop him from implementing his policy to address the issues of the border. And now we're going to impeach him because you say he's not addressing the issues at the border. Which do you want?
Can you give me the definition of a high crime and misdemeanor?
I think no single definition is satisfactory in every case, but I think Charles Black's is a pretty good general statement. That is to say, high crimes and misdemeanors should be extremely serious offenses in the way that serious crimes like treason and bribery are.
Extremely serious.
Second,
from that, let me go off of that one, sir. That's a great point. Is the selling of fentanyl inside the United States causing hundreds of thousands of deaths over the past years considered a high crime in your opinion?
I'm unaware that the Secretary has sold any fentanyl.
No, I'm not directing that to the Secretary. I'm asking you, is the selling of fentanyl inside the United States, killing hundreds of thousands of Americans over the years, would that be considered a high crime?
If you could establish that.
Boy, that's a yes answer all day long.
If
you don't say yes, that's bad. That's bad juju.
Did that possibly?
All right, so let me ask you this
Aware
one.
of no evidence that ever happened.
There's no evidence that hundreds of thousands of people over the past few years have died from fentanyl overdoses?
I'm unaware of any evidence that Secretary Mayorkas has ever sold.
I'm not talking about Secretary Mayorkas. I'm talking about fentanyl deaths.
That's what we're here to talk about, are we not, Congressman? Secretary Mayorkas?
If you'll allow me to finish, if you'll answer my question, I'm getting to my point.
It's your time, so you can,
All right, so let me ask you this, since we're unhinged on the fentanyl deaths. Do you consider slavery a high crime?
Is there any evidence that Secretary Mayorkas has enslaved anyone?
This is getting a little bit more complicated than I thought it was going to be. I want to know if I'm supposed to go back to the folks in my district and tell them that the individual responsible for securing the American borders is falling short because the United States is one of the top countries on the planet for sex slaves. We lose 100,000 people a year to fentanyl overdoses, and the individual responsible for protecting us is Mr. Mayorkas. That's where I'm going with that. The fact that you didn't jump on top of and say that those things were absolutely involuntary, the worst things ever, is graphically disturbing to me. I pitched that one up as a softball, buddy, and you failed miserably.
And our immigration system won't be fixed by this impeachment process, and it certainly won't be fixed by their proposal, which is H.R. 2. And let's set the record straight about H.R. 2. The bill would end Health and Human Services funding for legal representation of unaccompanied children in immigration proceedings. It would essentially send children to detention camps, and the bill subjects all unaccompanied children to an accelerated removal process, as we know, in horrible conditions at these facilities that we have seen over the last few years. And quite frankly, we know this is not just not a solution, but it's inhumane and cruel to demonize some of the most vulnerable people that are coming to our country. We want to address the root causes of migration. We want to ensure that legal pathways are followed. We want to make sure that folks receive the support they need back in their home countries. And we certainly don't want to defund organizations like Catholic Charities that would rip away aid to communities and to migrants across our country and along our border. The idea that our border problems, which have needed a bipartisan solution for decades, would be solved by H.R. 2 is just not true. It's an anti-immigrant policy, and we should reject it.
Alexander Hamilton stated in Federalist paper 65, the subjects of impeachment are a nature which may be denounced political, as they relate chiefly to injuries done immediately to society itself. My God, what about the injuries done to society that we've seen? To our three illustrious attorneys general, please tell me the injuries done to your societies back home, and do you think this secretary merits and that impeachment is warranted in this case?
Thank you, Representative. I think the most powerful statistic I can give you from my state is our confirmed state crime lab fentanyl overdose death rate. Since 2019, Montana's confirmed fentanyl overdose deaths have increased 1,700%. Congressman, I think that is the absolute strongest indicator. We know where these drugs are coming from. It's not a political statement of mine, it's not an opinion of mine to say that 100% of that fentanyl came from the Mexican drug cartels. We know that to be true. We get that from our federal partners in the DEA, we get that from all of our drug task forces, and all the law enforcement agencies that are under my purview.
Just real quickly, General Drummond and Bailey, just very quickly.
We have witnessed a mass collusion between Chinese nationals coming through the southern border in concert with Mexican cartels.
1,500 fentanyl deaths, 43 children dead from accidental poisoning from exposure to fentanyl, $114 million borne by taxpayers in increased healthcare costs.
A letter, an op-ed that was written by Joshua Matz and Norm Eisen, who were former members of the House Judiciary Committee who've actually worked on impeachment hearings before. And they talked about the absence of evidence to support impeachment here. And on a couple of respects that I think are important that we go through. One is the issue of maladministration. So the framers, when they put the provision, and they went through different iterations of it, but they ended up with the language they've got, but excluded a term like maladministration so that we wouldn't have impeachment hearings for policy differences. Because, and this is James Madison, if we did that, the Senate could be picking and choosing and throwing out people. Just on policy disagreements, we should leave that to the president. The president gets to make a selection, pick his cabinet or her cabinet, hopefully one day, and make the decisions on who should be ruling there. The issue here, and that's pointed out in the Eisen letter, and with respect to the group of professors led by Lawrence Tribe and others who point this out, this is just a maladministration dispute. My colleagues over here are talking about the borders run amok and all of that, and I hear that point, but that's just a policy difference. In the testimony that was given, points about bribery, treason, crime, high crimes and misdemeanors don't seem to have been made. There's no legal violation, there's no criminal act, there's no basis that the framers were looking for to remove a cabinet member from office. That's a very serious step. And by the way, I got a printout of all of the impeachment legislation that my colleagues have put together. I think Ms. Taylor Greene alone just has 8 impeachment resolutions in this Congress. 8. 3, I think, against Secretary Mayorkas. So if we're going to be serious about this, let's try and get to the issues with respect to the actual legal piece. And I apologize, Mr. Chairman, but I'll conclude there. And I look forward to actually having a debate and experts who can speak to this from expertise or scholarship on the issue of the standard for impeachment.
And the failure to secure the homeland has been so significant, so catastrophic, that Congress must use its power to provide accountability. We must be the check and the balance against such an extremely egregious breach of public trust, and that's what this is. And if not this effort, then I ask my Democrat colleagues, what effort? Where is your answer to accountability? Where is your Article 1 authorities to check the executive branch?
Will the gentleman yield to answer the question?
No, the answer from the other side simply cannot be that we're powerless. And I ask rhetorically, if not this effort, then how do we hold this failure? And you'll have your chance to wax poetic on that. Let's just go through the numbers. Fiscal 23, 27,000 pounds of fentanyl was seized. That's what was seized. That's not all that entered this country. Mr. Chairman, the Speaker of the House has put together a document, and it goes step by step for the actions the administration has taken since January 20th of 2021. President Biden terminated the national emergency at the southwest border. President Biden issued an executive order further entrenching DACA program. Biden unveiled the U.S. Citizenship Act, which would provide amnesty. The administration issued an executive order ending limitations and restrictions on immigration without certain countries associated with terrorism. Then Secretary Mayorkas delivered remarks effectively explaining the border is open for illegal immigration by stating that DHS's focus would be on processing. On and on and on. Mayorkas issued a memorandum prohibiting enforcement of immigration laws in certain areas, including schools, healthcare, and facilities. Mayorkas terminated migrant protection protocols. Mayorkas issued a memorandum that states the fact that an individual is removable alien should not be the sole basis of an enforcement action.
The Mayorkas administration, the Biden-Mayorkas administration, is actually violating both. They're not detaining people coming in, either, or they're not keeping them in a third country, and they're not detaining the United States, and they're also allowing mass parole, which violates the clear intent of Congress. Is it your opinion that that this is a policy issue, and that the Biden administration has the right to clearly subvert the will of Congress?
My opinion, Congressman, is that disputes over the exercise of discretion by the Secretary are difficult. They're being resolved in the courts. And I must say that those disputes have not yet been finalized. Indeed, the only cases involving those disputes that have made it up to the Supreme Court have resulted in rulings in favor of the Secretary and of the President. Essentially, this is an ongoing legal and policy dispute. It is not, therefore, the kind of thing for which impeachment should be used.
Well, I believe that, that we're at a crossroads here, because I do believe that we, Congress, have given way too much leeway to the administrative branch, if that's the case. This is clearly the intent of Congress was people coming to the border need to either stay in another country, or they need to be detained. And it clearly was that parole was to be done on a case-by-case basis. Now, I don't believe that there's an issue of policy. It's an issue of violating the law.
My. Mr. Bowman, I wasn't even going to ask you any questions today, but I'm going to give you an opportunity to clarify it for record. And I do believe that, according to your resume, you're a professor of constitutional law, sir. Is that correct?
I am an emeritus professor at the Missouri School of Law.
So you're a smart guy. You got an alphabet behind your name on your business card. So is it your position that you're taking today as a Democrat's witness that the founders' intent with the term high crimes and misdemeanors was designed to restrict the power of impeachment to a violation of specific written statute? Is that your position? We're listening.
Yes, and
that is your position. Okay, and
no, excuse me, Congressman.
You said yes. It's a simple question.
No,
I'm gonna move on.
Excuse me, Congressman.
It clearly was not
reclaiming
my time. It clearly was not the intention of the founders to limit the power of congressional impeachment over the executive branch, to limit that to violation of written statute.
That's quite correct, Congressman. I've written extensively.
Oh, well, thank you. But you just said something different, but that's all right. We appreciate you being here today, Mr. Bowman, and representing University of Missouri. Sure, it's a wonderful law school. On this committee, we've carried out our investigation of Secretary Mayorkas. I sit here today to tell you, we're going to impeach him. He's going to be impeached, and he should be. He is the executive in charge of the border policy for President Biden. Now, President Biden has the right, as the chief executive, to hire men that don't have the skill and then figure that out down the line and replace them, President Biden also has a right as a chief executive to have wild policy in mind. But the executive that sits on his cabinet, that's in charge of actually enforcing those policies, that has the law enforcement experience to know when those policies are going to bring injury upon our country, that executive has a responsibility to advise the president that his policies are not only not working to secure the border, they're actually bringing injury upon our country.
As our attorney generals know, you are more aware of these numbers than we are because you deal with the after effects. Those 300,000 that came across the border just last month, many of those will end up in your communities. Your testimonies, as I've read them, says that your communities, your states, your cities, that you'll be responsible for housing, for feeding, for educating, for health care. You talk about the strain that this is going to be placing on the criminal justice system. And then you also talk about the total lack of response from our federal government. And so first I want to apologize to you that you are not getting the help that you need from the federal government. And the help that you need is not us sending you money after these immigrants have come into your community. The help that you need is us stopping the immigrants from coming across the border. Do you believe that there is a crisis at the southern border, and is the border secure? So I guess I'm going to ask each of you two questions. Is the border secure? We'll start there. And the second one is, do you believe that there's a crisis? Attorney General Knudsen, we'll begin with you.
Congressman, the southern border is absolutely not secure, and this is far beyond a crisis at this point.
Similarly, it is not secure, and we have a crisis.
General Bailey?
The border is not secure in the crisis of historically epic proportion.
And Mr. Bowman?
As I said at the outset, I'm not an expert on immigration policy. I don't have any opinion on this question.
What's your personal opinion?
My personal opinion is that there is, as there has been for decades, and indeed probably a century and a half in this country, a lot of controversy about immigration policy. There's controversy about the way in which immigration policy is being administered at the southern border. I think at the moment we seem to have more problems in that area than we've had in some past eras. Yes.
Thank you for your very politically correct answer. So with that, I yield back.
We used to come together to resolve policy disputes, but now Republicans are trying to use the awesome power of impeachment instead. The Constitution doesn't let us do that. The Constitution requires high crimes and misdemeanors. Professor Bowman, has Secretary Mayorkas, in your opinion, committed high crimes and misdemeanors to meet that requirement?
Based on all the information available to me, I have not found any indication that he's committed high crimes and misdemeanors, no.
Thank you.
This isn't a narrative. It's not one created by the Republicans, and I'll take us back to my home state of New York, where you have Democrats. Our governor has said flat out, there's no room left in New York. There's no room at the inn. Don't send migrants here anymore. We've heard a Democrat city mayor, Mayor Adams, who I disagree with virtually everything about, but this I actually agree with. He has said that the migrant issue in New York City will destroy New York.
We are here today because Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas has intentionally gone around and subverted the immigration laws of the United States of America. We are here today because Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas has repeatedly defied orders from courts directing him to cease and desist certain policies, which he continues to utilize. We are here today because the Department of Homeland Security has defied inquiries from Congress, trying to get to the bottom of the scope and the scale of this crisis. And we are here today because Secretary Mayorkas has defied congressional directives related to spending, congressional directives as to how money was supposed to be spent. We are here because there is an unchecked flood of illegal immigration at our southern border that is destroying not just border communities, but communities around our country.
He went on to list factors that ICE agents should weigh when deciding whether to pursue enforcement and removal or not. Attorney General Knudsen, as a former prosecutor yourself, does it make any sense to give credence to mitigating factors when considering whether to prosecute someone that has already been proven to have broken the law when they crossed our border illegally?
Congressman, certainly not, especially when there's specific directive in federal law that requires that person be detained and be prosecuted. The idea that individual prosecutorial discretion suddenly means you have the right to blanket en masse pardon people or parole them into the heartland of the country, that simply does not exist in statute. I agree with the concept generally of prosecutorial discretion on a case-by-case basis, and indeed, that's what the federal law allows. But that's not what's being done here. It's being just implemented on a mass scale, wide open en masse, and that is simply not justified anywhere in federal code.
Thank you. I must say I was disappointed to see that the factors in favor of removal didn't include the significant financial and human costs to American citizens. Our hospitals are inundated with illegals. Schools are overrun with non-English speaking, setting other students back. And now New York has sent teachers and American students home and turning public schools into bunker houses for illegal aliens. This is totally unacceptable.
It requires discipline. It requires focus. It requires that, we don't turn ourselves into a banana republic. Article 2, Section 4 says the president, vice president, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. The Constitution absolutely gives authority to impeach and remove the president, vice president, and all civil officers for treason, bribery, high crimes, and misdemeanors. This tool was inherited from English practice in which Parliament impeached and convicted ministers and favorites of the crown in a struggle to rein in abuse of power. That's the historical precedent on this. And let me back that up, okay? So it's been talked about this morning. Federalist 65 has some admonitions, has some warnings, and it says the subjects within the context of impeachment, in Federalist 65, written by Alexander Hamilton, it says the subjects of its jurisdiction, talking about impeachment, are those offenses in which proceed from the misconduct of public men, or in other words, from the abuse or violation of some public trust. It goes on to say that the model from which the instrument of impeachment, the idea of this institution has been borrowed, pointed out, that course to be the convention. In Great Britain, it is the province of the House of Commons to prefer the impeachment and the House of Lords to decide upon it. Two-part, just like we've employed in our Constitution. Several of the state constitutions have followed this example, as well as the latter, as the former seem to have regarded the practice of impeachment as the bridle in the hands of the legislative body upon the executive servants of government. You know why I love that? I grew up in the performance horse industry, and I learned 3-stage stops from a father who trained cutting horses professionally. You sit down, they feel the pressure of that. Then you say, whoa. And then a well-trained, well-disciplined animal learns that when they feel the 3-stage stop coming, they're going to park it without having to lift the 4 ounces of the reins of the bridle. The problem is we've got men and women who serve in positions of authority, and the definition, according to AQHA, of a reining horse, I love this, is willfully guided, willfully controlled. The problem is when you have men and women in influence who aren't willfully guided and willfully controlled by the Constitution, and as stated by Alexander Hamilton, the job of the legislative body is to grab the reins and say, whoa. And we have an out of place, out of their floodplain, bureaucracy within Homeland Security that is doing what they want to, not following the rule of law.
Last week, one of our Republican colleagues said he was not likely to support any compromised border bill because, quote, I'm not willing to do too damn much right now to help a Democrat and to help Joe Biden's approval rating. I will not help the Democrats try to improve this man's dismal approval ratings. I'm not going to do it. Why would I, end quote. Why would he? Because we need to work together to address the critical issues that our committee has jurisdiction over. Because we owe it to our constituents and our communities to meet this moment. But that's not what this hearing is about. Because when you talk about approval ratings and not wanting to help Democrats, not wanting to help this administration, not wanting to help our president, you undermine the seriousness of what is being discussed today. And you make clear what this has always been, political pursuit. Speaking of politics, I have a few yes or no questions for the three attorney generals here today. You are all elected officials, is that correct?
Yes.
I was appointed to my office subject to election by the people.
Understood. And you are all Republicans, is that correct?
Yes.
And lastly, in 2016 and 2020, President Trump won in the states that you serve as Attorney General of?
Yes.
Yes.
So it's fair to conclude that it's politically beneficial for you to be supportive of the former president and his policies and oppose President Biden's policies, as is the case for all of our Republican colleagues here on this committee. But constitutional law is clear on this point. Policy, political differences are not appropriate grounds for impeachment. Mr. Bowman, is that correct? Yes or no?
It is. Gentlemen, how long roughly did it take you to become Attorney General? Go ahead, Mr. Knudsen.
Well, roughly how long? I mean, campaigned for the better part of a year.
No, entire career. Just like 20 years, 15 years, how long did it?
Roughly 15 years.
What about you, Mr. Drummond?
40.
Mr. Bailey?
Been practicing law for 10 years.
Yeah, so you guys just didn't wake up one day and say, I want to be Attorney General, and snap, that happened, right? I noticed that some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have been trying to diminish your qualifications. What's the primary responsibility of the federal government, Mr. Knudsen?
Primary responsibility of the federal government is to carry out and execute the laws of the Congress.
Yeah, is it to protect our unalienable God-given rights as well?
Absolutely.
What about, does our government have a responsibility to protect its citizens, Mr. Bailey?
Yes.
Are any of you guys familiar with Article 4, Section 4 of our Constitution, often called the Invasion Clause? Anybody?
Yes.
I'm going to read it real quick. The United States shall guarantee to every state in the Union a republican form of government and shall protect each of them against invasion. Now, there's arguments right now about whether or not this is an invasion, but it's tough to argue when you have the equivalent of a combat division size of illegals coming across our southern border. For those of you that don't know, that's 10,000 individuals every single day in invasion. And we've talked about what comes with those individuals from crime, the economic burdens on our citizens, the families being destroyed of fentanyl. You guys are all familiar with that. You guys see them every single day in your own states. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Are you guys aware of the job title of Alejandro Mayorkas, Mr. Knudsen?
His specific job title is Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security.
Secretary of Homeland Security. Now, I'm no constitutional scholar, Mr. Drummond, but just from that job title alone, would you assess that maybe his job might be to secure and protect the homeland?
He has the duty to control and guard our homeland.
Mr.
Policy of mass catch and release. And I was hoping that you could define, sir, for Americans who may be watching from home today and maybe not so familiar with this topic, what catch and release means, sir.
Thank you, Congressman. I can. So, generally speaking, Congressman, under 8 U.S.C. 1225, the law is very clear. The Secretary has a duty to detain every single alien that enters the country. Period. Hard stop. Shall be detained. There is one exception. There's a case-by-case exception listed under Section 1182, which allows, on a case-by-case, individual, temporary basis, for either humanitarian or for public justice reasons, an exception. Under Secretary Mayorkas' direction, that basically has been turned into not a case-by-case analysis, but rather a mass catch and release, where those individuals are no longer given an individual investigation, an individual notice to appear in front of a judge. They were given a notice to report. That appears nowhere in the Federal Register, that appears nowhere in federal law, and was basically used as a mass catch and release program. So that's what we're talking about.
So would you agree that the mass catch and release that is not done on a case-by-case basis is inconsistent with the laws passed by Congress and signed into law by by presidents of both parties?
Absolutely, Congressman. There is no legal authority anywhere in federal code for mass release of immigrants into this country.
On Secretary Mayorkas' watch, Customs and Border Protection has recorded more than 8.1 million encounters at America's borders, including more than 6.7 million at our southwest border alone. For comparison, CBP recorded just over 3 million encounters nationwide from fiscal year 2017 to 2020. Jay Johnson, President Obama's former DHS secretary, previously said that 1,000 encounters a day, quote, overwhelms the system, end quote. On Secretary Mayorkas' watch, encounters have never averaged less than 3,000 per day, even going as high as 10 to 12,000 per day. Just a few days ago, internal CBP numbers leaked to the media showed another 302,000 encounters at the southwest border alone in December. By far an all-time record. That's nearly enough people to fill the Rose Bowl 3 times in just 1 month. In addition to these catastrophic numbers of the record 1.8 million known gotaways who've entered the country on Secretary Mayorkas' watch, individuals that Border Patrol agents know slip across our border, but are not apprehended in large part because the cartels overwhelm the agents with large groups of coyote, paid, and escorted migrants. The agents see them and they count them, but they cannot apprehend them. But the numbers are most certainly far worse. As agents are moved to crossing sites to process migrants, and the border is completely unmanned, there are no agents present to count the known gotaways. The number of unknown gotaways is no doubt enormous. Thousands of agents have been pulled off the front lines to process and release into our country record numbers of illegal aliens who know they will be released into the country and given a free bus or plane ticket to the city of their choice. I ask you to watch this video.
A border shutdown in El Paso, Texas, as hundreds force their way onto the Paso del Norte International Bridge.
Title 42 has officially expired. Homeland Security officials say illegal border crossings topped 10,000 per day this week, the highest levels ever.
Thousands of migrants in central Mexico continue to travel on freight trains and travel all the way to the southern border, arriving here in Eagle Pass.
Outnumbered and out-resourced, Border Patrol agents say they are struggling to keep up with this massive influx of migrants descending on our southern border.
Border Patrol clearly does not have the manpower to process the thousands of migrants here. So the situation is pretty dire.
Hundreds upon hundreds of adult men who have crossed illegally, waiting here in the Arizona sun for Border Patrol to apprehend them, and they hope be released into the United States somewhere.
Sources telling News Nation that agents have been pulled from nearby checkpoints to assist in processing the thousands of migrants crossing into Eagle Pass every day.
And this is all by design. The smugglers realize that this particular area is vulnerable.
What Americans must understand today is that these historic numbers, the chaos you just saw on the screen, are the result of a much deeper problem. And that problem is not instability in other countries. It's not poverty. It's not climate change. It's not supposedly broken immigration system. All of these excuses have long predated Secretary Mayorkas' tenure, and yet we've never experienced a crisis like this. Border Patrol agents from the northern border have been deployed to the southwest border to assist in processing and releasing illegal aliens into the interior. Hundreds of law enforcement professionals from Homeland Security investigations have been pulled from serious investigations like sex crimes, child exploitation, and other atrocities to perform administrative functions at the border. One whistleblower claimed that his team was told to shut down its investigations and were then sent to the border to make sandwiches. The Secretary has abused his authority and put Americans at risk. Secretary Mayorkas has repeatedly lied to the American people and to the United States Congress. Our investigation uncovered more than 100 instances where Secretary Mayorkas misled the public. Notably, he claimed in April 2022 hearing to have operational control of the southwest border as defined by federal statute. This was false. He then told another lie by claiming in subsequent hearings that he does not use the statutory definition of operational control, despite doing so in that 2022 hearing. Watch for yourself.
Will you testify under oath right now? Do we have operational control, yes or no?
Yes, we do. And
we have operational control of the borders.
Yes, we do. And Congressman, we are working to...
Listen what operational control defined. In this section, the term operational control means the prevention of all unlawful entries into the United States, including entries by terrorists, other unlawful aliens, instruments of terrorism, narcotics, and other contraband. Do you stand behind your testimony that we have operational control in light of this definition?
We do. And Congressman, I think the Secretary of Homeland Security would have said the same thing in 2020. and in 2019.
That's the definition of
Based
operational
upon the
control.
definition you have, sir, up there, no.
We don't have operational control.
No, sir.
With respect to the definition of operational control, I do not use the definition that appears in the Secure Fence Act.
Do you admit that your policies have led the country farther away from operational control of the border as defined by the Congress?
Congressman, no, I do not.
If you will recall when you testified here in front of me when I asked that question, when you very clearly stated, we do have operational control. When presented with the actual definition of operational control, you didn't hesitate. You said, I do. And you, in fact, then referred back and said, I believe that my predecessors would have said the same thing. You looked straight at the American people, straight at me, straight at every person on this committee, and said, we have operational control. Why?
Congressman, 2 points. One, you did not let me complete my answer. Two.
Hold on. Let's give me your second point. Go ahead.
Thank you. Two, the Secure Fence Act defines operational control as not a single individual crosses the border.
I'm aware. I read it, and I read it to you, and you read it, and in fact, you said, I do. You didn't hesitate. You didn't say, I do. I need to explain what I mean by I do. You said, I do, over and over again.
Secretary Mayorkas told this very committee in September 2021, and I quote, "The border is no less secure than it was previously," end quote. CBP recorded more than 192,000 encounters at our border that month alone, compared to around 58,000 the prior September. It was clear the border was not secure, so why did he mislead Congress? Another video, please.
Is the border more secure under your leadership than when you started?
Congressman, the border is secure. We're executing our plan, and I've been very clear and unequivocal in that regard.
Mr. Secretary, the question is the border more secure now under your leadership?
Congressman, it is no less secure than it was previously.
We have a record number of retirements, historic level of narcotics that have come across the border, and you still stand by your statement, yes or no, that the border is secure?
Yes.
He even stood at the White House podium in September 21 and falsely accused mounted Border Patrol agents in the Del Rio sector of whipping illegal aliens crossing the border. Earlier that same day, DHS emails showed that his staff had informed him that an eyewitness said no whipping occurred, yet he advanced the narrative at the highest levels anyway. One sector chief told us, and I quote, "We never whipped anybody. It was never really cleared up, and that takes a toll on our agents," end quote. Please play the video.
We are very troubled by what we have seen. One cannot weaponize a horse to aggressively attack a child. We know that those images painfully conjured up the worst elements of our nation's ongoing battle against systemic racism. First of all, the images, as I expressed earlier, the images horrified us in terms of what they suggest and what they conjure up in terms of not only our nation's history, but unfortunately the fact that that page of history has not been turned entirely. And that means that there is much work to do, and we are very focused on doing it.
An email obtained through a records request reveals that DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas was privately alerted by DHS officials that the whipping narrative behind the infamous horseback Border Patrol photos wasn't true. But at a press conference hours later, Mayorkas didn't stop or dispute that narrative.
This is just a taste of Secretary Mayorkas' misconduct. However, I want to close by reminding everyone that we're here today not only because House Republicans are determined to hold Secretary Mayorkas accountable, but because more than 200 House Democrats voted on November the 13th to refer articles of impeachment to our committee. We're now acting in a bipartisan way, I suppose, in taking up those very articles.